Former undercover CIA officer, how much can you tell me about this, and would you have to kill me?
I can tell you enough that I don't have to kill you, but if you tortured me and I revealed state secrets that are still secrets, then probably would have to try to kill you.
Welcome to the Termsheet podcast. I'm Allie Garfinkle, senior finance reporter here at Fortune. And yes, Termsheet is no longer just your written newsletter, it's now talking back. Here's the deal. We're going to break down the latest news in private equity, venture capital, and the startup world. Every week, we're going to take a peek behind the curtain and speak with some of the most exciting figures in the private markets. And just like in the newsletter, I'll share some insights on the week's biggest news, what's top of mind for me, and the latest on deals and deal makers. Termsheet has a long, illustrious history. Termsheet was started by Dan Primack, who's now at Axios. The success of it comes down to probably two things. One, I stand on the shoulders of giants. A lot of really talented people have written Termsheet over the years and have really kept up the quality of the newsletter. So quality is part of it. I also do think that the private markets aren't covered nearly as much as lots of other areas. If you think about coverage of big tech, for example, there is a massive amount of coverage of Apple or a massive amount of coverage of Amazon. But actually, for a lot of these giant startups, and they are giant, don't get me wrong, Stripe is valued at $91 billion, for example. These startups are massive. And there are a lot of startups that are sort of future giants that are coming up. And there are only so many people covering them. I've covered all kinds of sectors. I've covered sort of big consumer goods companies. I've covered insurance companies. I've covered big tech. And startups in the private markets, the best thing about it is that people really want to talk and they want to be listened to. And that is, I think, part of why I was so excited to do this show. It is my favorite thing in the world to have a conversation with someone interesting who has devoted their life to something. And startups are just filled with those people. And that's why we're here. And I suspect that's probably why you're here too. So every week on the Termsheet podcast, I'm going to share some of my insights about tech, finance, and the private markets. And what's on my mind this week, of course, is probably what you would expect. If you're out there right now listening, in all likelihood, Figma is a public company. Now, this is a really big deal in Silicon Valley. Some of Silicon Valley's biggest names in venture capital are holders of billion-dollar stakes or more in this company. That includes Sequoia Capital, Kleiner Perkins, Greylock, Index Ventures. Now, if you don't know any of these names, that's actually okay, because there's actually a broader philosophical thing going on here. Figma isn't just a big deal for the VCs who back it or for the company itself. It's a big deal for Silicon Valley's venture capital system as a whole, because this is a moment where what we're seeing is an exit. An exit is a moment where your investment 5-10 years in the past, 15, 20 in some cases, comes to fruition. And we're seeing fewer and fewer of those over the last few years. For this first episode, we're going to welcome Will Hurd, who's Chief Strategy Officer at Chaos Industries. He also is a former congressman and former presidential candidate. I was really excited to talk to Will for a couple of reasons. The first, Chaos, a defense tech company founded in 2022, operated in stealth for many years, so is still pretty new, but is valued at $2 billion, has raised about $500 million from key investors like Accel, 8VC, and NEA. And I'll be honest, this is a very vulnerable first conversation for me because defense tech is an area I've long been afraid of covering. And I wanted to stretch myself. I wanted to bring this first episode to you in a way that was something that in some cases, at least for those of you like me who maybe don't know as much about defense tech, have a chance to learn. So I'm approaching this with a complete beginner's mindset. And my understanding is that Will's the guy to explain a lot of this stuff to me. Let's welcome Will. Welcome to the first Termsheet podcast.
Oh my God, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be the first. It's a lot of pressure.
I was going to say, how are you taking the pressure? Do you feel good about it? You've been under quite a bit of pressure in your life, though, I expect.
I enjoy pressure. So I'm looking forward to this, and I'm sure your viewers and the people that read Termsheet are going to give us their opinion after this is over. So
they absolutely will. It's the best thing about Termsheet. I get everyone's opinion all the time. So with you, there's so much to get into. Former congressman, former presidential candidate, now in defense tech. But I want to start with a fact about you that has lived rent free in my head ever since the first time I Googled you. Former undercover CIA officer. How much can you tell me about this, and would you have to kill me?
I can tell you enough that I don't have to kill you. But if you tortured me and I revealed state secrets that are still secrets, then probably would have to try to kill you. Look, it was the best job on the planet, right? I started when I was 22, and my job was to recruit spies and steal secrets overseas. Right? I did 2 years training in the CIA at our super secret CIA training facility called the Farm. Now it's on Google Maps. It truly is. Like, I wish that was a joke. It actually is on Google Maps. I did 2 years in India, 2 years in Pakistan. I was in New York City for 2 years doing interagency work, working with the FBI and working with DHS and customs and things like that. And then a year and a half in Afghanistan, where I manage all of our undercover operations. And then when I left Afghanistan, a couple of months later, so I left in August '09. December '09 is when we had the Coast attack. That was one of the deadliest attacks in CIA history. So my career really was, focused on counterterrorism.
Your career started at an incredibly chaotic moment in U.S. history. The What are the skills necessary to recruit a spy, and do they still have uses in your life now?
So a CIA officer, we're not a spy. The spy is the person that is giving you secrets, right? And is usually the foreigner. Um, the movies make you seem like the people that are putting themselves in harm's way are throwaway. That's absolutely not the case. My number one job was to make sure that person stayed alive, because they were putting themselves, they were putting their family in harm's way, and potentially, if they were found out, they would be killed. And so protecting that was most important. But the way I describe it is like you're a professional friend. Right? Like the other person has to like you, has to respect you, have to get to know you. One of the things we're taught in the CIA is what is that person's motivation to work with you, right? And some people say, when I speak to kids, I always say money. I was like, no, it's not money. It's what does that money get you, right? And so you always are learning about understanding and motivation. And so that translates into dealing with in sales, right? It definitely translated into Congress when I'm going out and representing a huge district, try to understand what my constituents needed and wanted. And it helps look, it helps with my wife. Don't tell her I said that. Hopefully she's not watching. But really understand why somebody is doing something. And I can even go back to, I think it was Franklin Covey that always said, seek to understand before being understood. And that's something that was a critical skill for a case officer in the CIA.
That's really well. Have you ever read Charles Duhigg's Super Communicators?
No, I have not.
There's actually an entire chapter about what it takes to recruit a spy,
Okay.
and how it is actually, people think of it as an act of persuasion, but actually it's an act of listening in a lot of cases. Does that ring true to you?
100%. 100%. Here's a little trick. Here's a little tip for all you. See, everybody who's tuning in to your first show is going to get a tip. Hopefully, I don't get in trouble for sharing this. But if you and I are sitting somewhere, and I talk more than you, I will have a better opinion about you than you will about me, right? And so it is letting the other person talk actually increases the likelihood that person is going to like you, because guess what? At the end of the day, most people like to talk about, they like to talk.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so that's a little psychological thing that you learn. It's like the fifth lesson you learn at the farm.
You went from, there's a lot that happened in the middle, right? Between undercover CIA officer and defense tech. At the same time, a lot has sort of changed in the relationship between tech and Uncle Sam. Walk me through, before we started this call, you said something to me like no one wanted anything to do with Uncle Sam 5 years ago. What has changed?
No, look, and here's how my perspective is framed on that question. I left the CIA to run for Congress.
Yeah.
In addition to recruiting spies and stealing secrets, I had to brief members of Congress, and I was pretty frustrated with the caliber of our elected officials. And my mother, may she rest in peace, always said, "You're either part of the problem, part of the solution." So I decided to run for Congress. Now I lost that first election by 700 votes. Glad I don't have to tell
Ooh,
that story anymore.
ooh.
But I helped build a cybersecurity company, and we did technical vulnerability assessment, penetration testing. The company ultimately got sold to Accenture, and it was a real insight in 2009, 2010, the threats to our digital infrastructure, right? And that seemed like a really 15 years ago seemed like a really long time, but that was when I really kind of got my feet wet. And it was that experience that when I did run for Congress and win, I used that in Congress to talk about technology. I held the first hearings on AI. I
When were
wrote
those first hearings on AI, by the way?
the
What
first
year are
hearing
we
on AI
talking?
was in 2015.
Did
2015.
people were people looking at you like you had broccoli coming out of your
It,
ears?
it was. Look, I thought at the end of this hearing, we were going to know when I could be in my driverless car, barreling down Interstate 10 and have a drone drop Whataburger through my sunroof, right? And while I'm watching a movie that was created by AI, right? Like that's what I thought we were going to be talking about, right? And we ended up it generated into our drones going to be peeping in our windows. And
Hmm.
I'm like, you're not worried about the FedEx guy peeping in your window. Yes, there's some privacy concern, and we always got to manage that. But there was just a lack of understanding. And so I will say this: in Congress, the evolution of the conversation on AI from then to now has evolved quite some time. So look, I was in Congress during the issue of Project Maven, when people in Google employees said they're not going to work for Uncle Sam. Right. I was there when I was talking about a smart wall. Right. Like I had more border than any other member of Congress. And I was like, we should be using technology. And some guy named Palmer Luckey called me and was like, I got your smart wall. Right. And I'm
Wait,
like,
a smart wall? Wait, I have no actually wait, what are we Palmer Luckey had a smart wall?
Anduril's first product was this innovative tower initiative,
Oh
right?
my gosh, and that was that product.
That was that product. And so
That's
when
wild.
Palmer called, I was like, "Have you ever been to the border?" And he was like, "Yeah, we've tested this at San Diego." And again, to all the people from San Diego that's watching, I apologize for this, but San Diego is not the border. Like let's go to South Texas. And I took Palmer and Brian and all those guys, and really that it was interesting seeing that back then. And then when I left, I joined the board of OpenAI. This was before the coup. And then I
But
was at
before
Allen
time.
Company. Yeah, I was an Allen Company in the investment bank. And so in 2000 in 2021, nobody, no not many venture capitalists, not much family offices, nobody wanted to invest in a company that had Uncle Sam as a client, let alone having Uncle Sam as the single most important customer. And that was a long-winded way, Allie, to set up to
Mhm.
say what has changed. What has changed is the nature of warfare has completely changed. Warfare now is defined by speed, it's defined by scale, and it's defined by savagery. And the only way to keep up in this dangerous world is if we start iterating on products and deliver things at the edge. And so that is what has changed. And companies that like Palantir proving their capabilities, I think is what has set this moment up.
Did you ever think you would see so much money being poured into defense tech? As you've sort of watched the space developed, how much of it has surprised you?
Look, I think a lot of it has surprised me. The founders of Chaos, the company I am with now, they were some of the original investors. Kind of in this defense tech space early on, and it's been somewhat shocking to them. And there's going to be some winners and some losers, right? There's no question about this. And oftentimes, I think Silicon Valley is always talking about how DoD needs to move faster. And yes, they do. And DoD understands that and appreciates that. Look, there's legislation that's going to be moving soon called the SPEED Act that, Chairman Mike Rogers is trying to make it show that you can get the right tech in people's hands. But guess what? That tech has to work every time out of the box when you give it to a warfighter. It has to work in incredibly difficult environments like Ukraine. When you talk to Ukrainian folks in the Ukrainian services, they're pretty frustrated with a lot of American tech because the stuff's not working in a communications denied environment. And we know that because we were out there. We were with folks, fighters in Ukraine. Our systems was deployed outside Kharkiv. We understand the difficulty, not only when the Russians are trying to jam something, but it has to work in the snow. Right? It has to work in the heat. And so I think this is where, even though there's so much money coming in, there's still going to be some winners and some losers. But the difference this money is making is allowing a pathway to success. In DC, what's about the what do they call it? The canyon of despair, where it's like you work
the trough of disillusionment.
Yeah, it's like you're going to be able to get beyond that because the government has sales cycles just like you have in the commercial industry. Those sales cycles are longer and a little bit more complicated, and there's a lot more people involved. And so having that runway of money gives you an ability to deliver a product. And I think that's what we're lucky to have been successful and having $500 million in the bank account to be able to help us build these technology and tools that the warfighter definitely needs.
Well, there's something very interesting here because it sounds like part of success in defense tech is just going to be defined by whose technology works in even the most extreme circumstances, no matter what.
That's right.
But how else do you think the winners and losers are going to sort of be spread out across defense tech?
Look, I think another thing is how fast can you iterate and get tools in the hands of the warfighter. Look, what drove me to Chaos is that we're giving the warfighter more time, right? Time to understand, time to decide, time to act, time to win, right? And we do that by having a radar that can give you 5 to 10 more minutes. When you have 5 to 10 more minutes, when you're getting shot at or bomb shots on your head, is a lifetime. And guess what? Old radars that a lot are still deployed that were made in the 40s and the 50s. There's those big things that turn, right? Because it can only see in one direction. Guess what? Figure out how to see in 360, or as all the engineers say, omnidirectional. And so can you deliver a product like that by breaking these paradigms? And can you deliver it in 4 months? And then can you deliver the volume that Uncle Sam needs, right? And so I think that is going to decide where the winners and the losers are going to be, because it's a harsh reality. They're going to kick the tires, and if that tire is flat, you're not going to have a chance. You're not going to have a chance to make that up again.
I was going to say, I imagine part of this too is that there is no second chance. It either works or it doesn't, and there are a very finite number of customers you can be going to. Like the customer for most, I mean, who is the customer for Chaos? Is it the DoD?
It's DoD, right? And it's all the branches, right? So.
Yeah.
So, we're in the middle of a contract negotiation with the Army. We're doing something with Air Force, where we're getting ready to do a big project at Eglin Air Force Base, because right now at Eglin they train the F-35s, right? One of the important weapon in our arsenal. Right now they can only train 3 planes at a time, because the way the range works, they can only track three planes at a time, which is crazy. You're gonna need more than 3 planes flying at any one time. Our system, they're updating the system. They're bringing us in order for us to be able to train hundreds of planes at any one stage. So that's a project that we have with the Air Force. We're trying to work with FAA. We're hearing about all these problems. Everybody knows about the problems at Newark, right? And so replacing the radars that have been in place for like 50 years, right? Like imagine watching TV on a device that's 50 years old, right? That was built the same way 50 years ago. That's insane. That's
What
insane.
you're describing actually is kind of an old school enterprise SaaS story in so many ways, where it's the technology has been here for so long, and there's kind of a tyranny of incumbent technology where it just is, this is, why do we have this radar? This is the radar we have had forever. Why would we have a different radar? The answer is, if there is something that could actually do a better job. It sounds like it sounds like a lot of these sort of branches of government are willing to be having that conversation now.
They have the resources. And look, you said earlier, like, what is the other thing that has changed? Mm-hmm. There is I say bipartisan, but it's actually nonpartisan understanding.
There's something that's nonpartisan right now.
This conflict between us and the Chinese government, right? And that the Chinese government is trying to surpass the United States of America in a number of technologies that are going to define the future. And Republicans and Democrats understand that. Members of the House and the Senate understand that. And so there is this recognition that on the global playing field, being first in a technology is not enough. You got to be able to have it deployed in some level of mass. And that's whether it's AI, quantum computing, or tools of warfare. And so that's another realization and understanding that is driving this interest in new things. And it's an understanding that we can't fight today's wars with the tools from 20 years ago.
What role do ethics play in what you do?
Look, it's real simple for me, right? And for the company, it is about how do we ensure that the United States and our allies have the best tools to defend themselves, full stop. And I think what has happened in Ukraine over the last couple of years have made people realize that war is still savage. It's even more so. What's happened in the Middle East over the last since October of last year has made people understand that. So the ethics are real simple. This is about protecting our soldiers who are protecting our way of life, and that's part of the great ethos about being in a company like this, is that it's about the mission. It's about protecting the people that are trying to give us the capability to enjoy the lives that are and things that are the envy of the world. And so the ethics are real simple. Build a great technology and a product and get it in people's hands.
It seems, based on your bookshelf behind you, you like history,
I do.
Right? You've talked about sort of the savagery of war quite a bit. What is, ultimately, if you had to distill it down, is warfare more savage today than it was 100 years ago?
I think if you, I think
people forget it was savage, maybe, because it sounds like that's part of some of the implication here, maybe.
So I think war has always been savage. I think now when you look at the asymmetry of warfare, where you can have tools, it's no longer who has the most exquisite system. There are Patriot missile batteries that are $600 million are being blown up by $20,000 Russian drones, right? And so a lot of this, you have AI that is making the decision. And we talk about the human in the loop. The human was in the loop, way early. It wasn't like they were making a decision about, do we drop this bomb or execute this thing? I think because of the volume that we're seeing and the mass that we're seeing is what's making it more savage or as savage. The body count may not be as high as the Second World War. We have seen body counts that have been higher, but the ability to execute. And look, getting someone to build a drone in their house and put it in a van and deploy it at a stadium or somewhere else is a lot easier thing to do than to convince someone to strap a bomb to themselves and blow themselves up, right? And so the evolution of how some of these tools that we're seeing on the battlefield, how they're going to be used by non-state actors, is something that is going to be incredibly scary.
I was gonna say I'm actively frightened. I'm actively frightened. The What do you think Silicon Valley most misunderstands about government, about DC?
I think Silicon Valley misunderstands, and I said this earlier. There is a sales cycle. They want to see something, and it has to work, and you got to be ready to produce a level of volume that is important, and that these are people that there's sometimes this hubris in Silicon Valley that they're smart and they can move faster, right?
Yeah.
And it's different when lives are on the line and you have to ensure that something works every single time, or it's gonna result in the loss of life. I think when you understand that, and that the men and women that make up procurement officers that are in government, they want to ensure the right things and the right tools get to the right people. And if you understand that motivation, then you're going to be able to work together and get things done. And that's been my experience when I was in government. It has been my experience since I've been out of government.
I was gonna say this actually brings us full circle to you being an undercover CIA agent, right? What is this person's motivation? What is this company's motivation? What's your motivation these days?
Look, my motivation is actually my 4-month-old daughter, right?
You have a 4-month-old?
I have a 4-month-old. That has been my motivation. And it's like, am I doing the things that can create an environment where my daughter is going to have some of the same opportunities that I've had, right? Am I going to be able to be an example to her? And so for me, it's kind of great getting back to my roots in national security and trying to build something. And look, my motivation is also, I don't want to be away from her. And so that's why working with great people and working in an environment where I'm learning things is valuable, because the opportunity cost is I'm away from Simone, who has the greatest smile on the planet, and so that's my motivation. That little peanut.
Well, I'm honored you've taken some of your precious waking hours with Simone to spend some time with me and here in the Termsheet audience. Thank you so much, Will Hurd.
I thank you for having me.
In a lot of ways, Will was everything I expected him to be. He had the polish of a politician and the charisma to match, but also was kind of a great person to do a preliminary conversation about defense tech with for me. I feel like it's an area I don't understand that's so high stakes. When you're talking about warfare, I'm the history nerd, so I like talking about war that happened 100 years ago and not the ones that are happening right now necessarily. And it's something I have to improve upon. And Will, I thought, was an incredible Sherpa in that way. It also is very clear to me, in a way that I think it wasn't before, that defense tech, the sort of revolution that a lot of us woke up to, has been slowly happening for a very long time. And there are a lot of things that we actually are still not prepared for in terms of modern warfare, which is genuinely terrifying and I guess a place to end on. Ugh. But it is also important to remember this is where the money's going right now too, right? Chaos has raised $500 million, and I expect is set to raise a whole lot more before the music stops. And that's true of many of these defense tech startups. Now, before we wrap up, We have a couple last orders of business. The first is the deal of the week. Now, the deal of the week is going to be pretty obvious today. Ramp. Ramp is an expense tech company. Ramp is what's called a fintech, a financial technology company, one that has sort of really thrived at a moment that's been very, very historically difficult for fintechs. And thrive may actually be an understatement here. Ramp has had quite a summer. In June, it raised a round that valued the company at $16 billion. And today, a month later, give or take, the company is now valued at $22.5 billion. That's on the backs of a $500 million round. Now, the guy who runs Ramp is a really interesting guy. His name's Eric Gleiman. He's one of the co-founders, current CEO. He actually used to live in China and is a big history nerd. And I've got to tell you, Eric, out there, if you're listening, call me. That valuation jump is really something I would love to talk about in Termsheet. Now, speaking of Termsheet, one thing that I know from the newsletter is that you all have a lot of opinions, and I want to hear from you. Every week, I'm going to read a hot take from my inbox on the podcast. So if you have been sending me hot takes anyway, this is your moment. If you have thoughts about VC, tech, finance that you want to share with me and this entire audience, alexandra.garfinkel@fortune.com. You know how to find me already, and now if you don't, you definitely do. Please send me your spiciest takes. I want to hear them, and I suspect so does everyone else. That's it for Termsheet episode 1. Thank you so much for joining, and I will see you next week. Termsheet is a Fortune Magazine podcast. Our producer and editor is Elena Stev. Our executive producer is Lydia Randall. Our production manager is Sam Freund. Art direction by Ariel Ray. Fortune's head of video is Adam Bannicky.